Thanks, Paul, and thanks to the team for putting it on. It's always a great pleasure to get in front of everybody and tell the story. As Paul mentioned, I feel as though I've been telling it for a while now. So and now the drill rigs are all about to arrive. So I'm either going to get up to a fanfare next time round, or people are going to start throwing things at me. But let me kick off. So, as Paul mentioned, so Alicanto, we're in Sweden, and we're exploring, two pretty amazing projects actually: the Falun Copper Gold project and the Sala Silver Zinc project. Both these projects have had a long history of production. In fact, Falun for over 1,000 years, and quite spectacular. I mean, I'm a bit of a history buff myself, but these two projects actually, helped finance Sweden to become a major global superpower back in the late 1600s, and there's been very little that's happened on these things since it's closed. So, when I joined the company about a year ago, I sort of had to scratch my head a little bit to understand how this company was able to get these two assets. But my good luck, and really, if we can make the future of these projects half as interesting as what there was there in the past, I think we're on to a real winner. But first of all, very high level about the company. We're in Sweden. Sweden's a pretty interesting place. It's it's got a long mining history, as I sort of alluded to previously. It's one of the biggest mining economies in Europe. People sort of talk, when I talk about mining in Sweden, people cringe a little bit. All you hear about Sweden is, how green it is and what have you. And, to tell you the truth, when I first got to Stockholm, I sort of half expected Greta Thunberg to pop up from behind the baggage carousel and tell me that I wasn't welcome here. But to tell you the truth, what I've found, and we do speak a lot to the politicians there, is that the Swedes are very pragmatic people. And you saw that during COVID. You saw that recently just with the whole issue of energy security in Sweden. They had a target that they were going to be 100% renewables by 2040. And they've changed that. They're now going to be 100% fossil-free by 2040. So that's the type of people you're dealing with. And when you start to sort of talk about Europe and where it is and the Critical Minerals Act and what they're trying to do in terms of self-sufficiency of minerals and some of the vulnerabilities that people feel in Sweden, the politicians are pretty supportive about, what we can do with projects like this in terms of supporting numerous new industries that are getting built in Sweden. You look at battery minerals and all of those, battery production facilities and the like. These things are springing up in Sweden all the time. They are the home of Volvo and most of the mining equipment, and so it's the next leg for them. And so, commodities is a very important part of all of that for them. We've got a great team, both here in Australia, but also in Sweden. The team here in Australia is responsible for companies like Bellevue Gold. That whole theory of where's the best place to find a mine? Well, it's right next to an old mine. And that's exactly what we're doing here again. We couldn't be next to two greater mines than we currently are. The team in Sweden is fantastic. The guy, Eric Lundrum, who runs our exploration up there, is the ex-chief geologist of Boliden. Boliden's one of Europe's biggest mining company and by far the largest mining company in Sweden. And he knows this area like the back of his hand. He's been mapping it and walking it. I think he's told me last time he's done about 2,400 outcrops that he's actually physically visited. He and his dog sort of walking through the forest up there. But all of this goes into mapping. You can have all of the technology in the world, but for him it all comes down to the rocks. And there's no guy better in the world that understands those rocks and that is better placed to be running our drill programs. But then finally, it's about the assets, and let me tell you very quickly about them. So Falun, as I mentioned, going for over 1,000 years, for hundreds of years was the biggest copper producer in the Western world. I'll say it again, for 100 years was the biggest copper producer in the Western world. Produced 28 million tonnes at 4% copper, 4 grams per tonne gold, 5% zinc. I mean, you find that sort of project today, and this thing's worth a fortune. We've now got sort of over 60 kilometres of this target limestone that we're exploring. And as Paul said, the drills start turning in the next few weeks. We've told the market it's going to happen before the end of the quarter, and we're on track for that to happen. And that's not to forget Sala. I mean, Sala was the largest and highest grade silver producer in Europe for hundreds of years. It produced 200 million ounces at an average grade of 1,244 grams a tonne. You start talking to people about those sort of grades today and people's heads start spinning. You don't see anything like those grades. And there were grades of up to 7,000 grams a tonne. It was an extraordinary asset back in its day. And again, we haven't held that asset for very long, but within a year we've sort of got a 10 million tonne resource there, and we are continuing to look for that high-grade silver. If we can find anything like that, the value of this company and the value of the resource that I have no doubt will continue to expand, just gets more and more valuable. Just to prove to you that it actually is real, so this is the old pit at Falun. Down here is the old portal where they went in, and I'll show you some diagrams of what it looks like under there. But this is only, this is one area. We think we've got sort of over a 10-kilometre mineralised trend hitting in Falun, going along this way towards the west. Which, and I'll get to it, but literally hasn't had a drill hole since it closed in the early 90s. Over here is the drilling that we have been doing at Sala. Quite interesting when you sort of see these cabins on top of drill rigs. Again, I've been up there in winter in Sweden, and it's bloody cold. I have no idea how that keeps anybody any warmer than not having that cabin there. But there you go. High level, our corporate summary there. We're capped at around about 25 million. We've got a massively supportive group of shareholders that continue to follow and finance the company over what has been sort of the last 4 years ago while we've been focused on Sweden. We've raised a couple of times this year, no problem raising that money, as people have really invested in what we've got there in Sweden. So again, why Sweden? It's always worth spending a little bit of time on this, because Sweden, everybody hears about Sweden and knows about it. On my last one of my last jobs, the mine was in Senegal in West Africa, and my wife showed absolutely no interest in coming with me to visit the mine. Whereas to come to Stockholm, well, that's not going to be any problem whatsoever. But it's an interesting place. If you have a look up north here, this is largely where the iron ore is. But it's also where the Sami people are. And you might have heard a little bit about the Sami people when people talk about the voice here in Australia. The Sami also have their own parliament up there in Sweden, with sort of the same rights as what, the advisory type of body that they're talking about here in the voice. So people always talk about it. But they do have this is the area where they have their reindeer herding and the paths where they take the reindeers year to year. And so it's hard work up here. Culturally, it's a very sensitive part of Sweden. And so when you hear, people talking about, approvals and how tough it is in Sweden, largely that refers to the operations up here. Fortunately for us, we're down in this Bergslagen region where they have some, there are very, very large VMS systems. You have Garpenberg, which is Boliden's very big mine, and you have Zinkgruvan, which is owned by Lundin. It's been this area has been mining for over 2,000 years. It's a very well-educated mining community. The infrastructure's fantastic. Again, going out to Falun for the very first time. Sala's only an hour out of Stockholm. Falun's only a couple of hours out of Stockholm, and they told me we'd take the back roads. Here I go across, in Sydney, I crossed the Harbour Bridge avoiding potholes. I mean, I can't tell you how beautiful those roads were, and these are their back roads, sort of going 2 hours out into the countryside. So this is Falun itself. So we've been exploring here for the last 3 or 4 years, and we're pretty comfortable now that we have this 10 kilometres of pretty prospective trend coming along here. When we started exploring here, we were looking for all those VMS systems that I mentioned to you, like the Garpenberg, like the Zinkgruvan, but Eric has redefined the geology of the region, and it's now a copper gold skarn that we're actually looking for. So within that mineralisation, that zinc, lead, silver mineralisation, where you do find those big VMS systems, we're looking for these Falun type structures, these elevated copper gold type structures that sit within that mineralisation. We started, when we did this, our first drilling here in October of last year, and I'll talk to it a little bit more on the next slide. We put our first hole down there, and it was incredibly successful. So successful as such that we went and bought the old Falun mine. We didn't own that at the time. And you can sort of see how small that footprint is. Within that small footprint, 100 by 200 by 500 metres deep, you've got 28 million tonnes at 4% copper. As I said, it's mind-blowing. And there hasn't been, and we're very comfortable that this trend along between Falun and Whitgrooven here, that's all the same system, if you like. And now what we've done a lot of hard work over the last 6 months getting ready for this drilling program. And we've done a lot of EM and a lot of gravity surveying, and we now have all of these gravity anomalies that sort of sit in the 3.5 kilometres between those two locations. And there hasn't been a single drill hole put in there. Now, what these gravity anomalies are is we hope, again, at this stage you can't say exactly what they are, but there's every chance, what we are looking for is repeats of that Falun structure. And so we've got a great drilling program lined up in just that area. We've got a really interesting anomaly or off-hole conductor that we found when we were drilling here last. When we bought Falun, we got a 1,400 hole database, and we've now modelled that up with, and it's just some of the intersections that came out of that. Steve Parsons, the ex-MD of Bellevue, who's one of the advisors to this project, sort of shakes his head a little bit and just says, again, when we started Bellevue, we didn't start with anything like this. So again, gives you a lot of excitement when guys like that are sort of talking about what we potentially got to go and look for. And then as you come down to the south and the southwest here, again, some really interesting, we're still doing the EM here, and some really interesting anomalies starting to appear. So again, when you start to, this area of interest, as I've sort of termed it, we've got numerous targets. It's actually, one of our challenges has been over the last 6 months is to try and zero in on what are the preferred targets for us. But let me talk a little bit very quickly about that Whitgrooven drilling. So we put it underneath this old Whitgrooven mine, which was an old zinc mine back in the day. And we put this first hole down there. Now, again, I'm no geologist, but we hit all of this fantastic mineralisation there. And if that's not sort of part of that old ore body, I'm a monkey's uncle, but I'm no geologist. But again, a really interesting hole. But what the whole theory is here is we hit the mineralisation, we do the downhole EM, and we look around for structures that are potentially the new Falun. And when you do that EM, effectively the copper gold is going to light up like a Christmas tree. And that's exactly what happened here. So we had one more hole that we could put down there. We did put it down there. We missed it. All I said to Eric was don't miss it, but he missed it, unfortunately. But we did hit this copper stringer zone, 8 metres of copper stringer, which we know sits in the footwall of Falun. So while it was disappointing that we missed that conductor, it was actually a really, really successful hole in terms of hitting that copper stringer zone. So this is actually one of our top targets when we go back to continue drilling at Falun. I mentioned to you when we bought that Falun asset, we got a 1,400 hole database. We've now sort of modelled it all up, and here you can see in the grey here the old Falun goes down about 500 metres. And when you think about some of the other mines in this region, the Garpenbergs, the Zinkgruven, these things are now down at 1,500 metres. So, again, the fact that we're starting to see some really interesting targets down in that area, no surprises really when you look at the geology of other mines in the region. But the thing that really blew me away when we started putting this together is how big some of these structures are. You look at Falun, and as I said, it's only a small footprint, but there's 28 million tonnes in there. You start to look at this western replacement zone, you look at this southeast replacement zone, and we'll have a look at this area here, but this northeastern copper gold zone, I mean, really, really interesting in terms of some of these structures. So in terms of that copper gold zone, it's hard not to get excited when you start seeing 50 metres at 3.5 grams per tonne gold, 11 metres at 61 grams per tonne gold, 7 metres at 7% copper. I mean, this is why we're really excited to get those drill rigs running here. Again, on the other side of the old mine, again, you start to look at, 7 metres at 8% zinc, 11 metres at 2% copper. The amount of targets that we've got around the old mine, which again shouldn't be surprising, as I said, with the theory being find a new mine next to an old mine. We've got a lot of good targets to go and have a look at. But that said, I'm just looking at this thing flashing at me now. That said, we've also got this Sala mine, and I'll go through this a little bit more quickly. We put our last results out in May. Here's the old Sala mine, 200 million ounces at that amazing grade, 1244 grams per tonne that I said before. We've put this 10 million tonnes around it. But what I've been really keen of in recent times is finding that high-grade silver. So I have no doubt that resource is going to get bigger, whether it's 10, 20, 30 million tonnes, who knows. But what we now understand is that this resource is going to continue to the north, probably underneath the old Sala mine. And again, what we're starting now to hit, and again, not great thicknesses, but when you see a metre at sort of 1,300 grams per tonne silver, you know that we're on the right track. And as I said, not only will we find the more tonnes there, but as we sort of add that high-grade silver, that should be really, really interesting in terms of the value of this prospect. Again, I look at something like Adriatic, and that's a fantastic operation, very different stage from where we're at, almost at the point where it's about to start construction. But it's worth over $1 billion. But its resource before the latest upgrade was 12 million tonnes at sort of 380 grams per tonne silver equivalent. So again, it just gives you some sort of benchmark in terms of when you have a look at what something like this might actually be. Very, very quick, again, when I sort of talk about Garpenberg, 300 or 200 million tonnes of resource, this is what it is, this is how it started, this is Sala, sort of fits into where that open pit was originally at Garpenberg. And Eric was the guy that found all of this additional resource when he was at Boliden. So, again, when I say he's the right guy to be looking for that additional resource for us, I absolutely mean it. So very high level, and thank you for your time. Sweden, right time, right place, as I say to everybody. When you overlay what's going on in Europe, a very supportive, political base in terms of getting more production going. You've got two great assets that are historically proven, and really the old timers, in my view, have really only just touched the sides of what's actually there on the basis of the work that we've done so far. We're just about to start drilling. We've got the right team there to do it. And, I think I say to everybody, look, watch this space. We start drilling at the end of the month, and, I'm really excited about hopefully what comes to be from there. Thanks, Paul, and thanks, everybody.